Gunfire echoed through the pristine halls of Mercy General, shattering the quiet night. 4 Tier 1 operators were bleeding out, pinned down by a ruthless hit squad. Standard protocol meant hiding, but head nurse Evelyn Carter didn't do standard. She bypassed the medical supplies and sprinted straight for her locker. The graveyard shift at Mercy General Hospital in downtown Seattle was notorious for its unpredictable chaos, but nothing could have prepared the staff for the storm that arrived at 0240 hours. The rain was coming down in sheets, hammering against the reinforced glass of the emergency room doors. Evelyn Carter, the 42-year-old head nurse of the Level 1 Trauma Center, was in the middle of charting a routine appendectomy when the violent screech of shredded run-flat tires tore through the ambient hum of the hospital. A black unmarked Chevrolet Suburban riddled with tightly grouped bullet holes slammed into the concrete pillars of the ambulance bay. The vehicle was smoking, its front grille crumpled like tin foil. Evelyn didn't flinch. She had spent a decade in emergency medicine. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. Jackson grabbed a crash cart. "Dr. Mitchell, we have an unannounced trauma in the bay." She barked, her voice cutting through the sudden silence of the waiting room. Before the paramedics could even push through the sliding doors, the heavy doors of the Suburban kicked open. 3 men spilled out. They weren't standard gangbangers or desperate civilians. They were massive, clad in unmarked coyote tan plate carriers, modular tactical belts, and battered Arc'teryx combat uniforms. They moved with a terrifying synchronized fluidity despite being catastrophically injured. The lead man, gripping a shortened Daniel Defense MK-18 rifle, dragged his comrade backward through the sliding glass doors, leaving a thick dark smear of arterial blood across the pristine white linoleum. The third man covered their rear, his weapon raised, scanning the rainy darkness outside. "We need a trauma surgeon now." The lead man roared, his voice. His left arm was completely useless, hanging limp from a shattered clavicle. But his right hand held his weapon with white-knuckled intensity. "Put the weapon on safe and sling it, or nobody touches him," Evelyn commanded, stepping directly into his line of sight. She didn't shrink back, her eyes locked onto his. The operator hesitated, his combat-addled brain processing her lack of fear. He glanced at her ID badge, then down at his dying teammate. He engaged the safety and dropped the rifle to hang on its sling. "He's got a severed femoral artery and a collapsed lung. We've packed it with quick clot, but the tourniquet is slipping." Evelyn dropped to her knees beside the wounded man. His skin was gray, his lips blue. "Mitchell, I need a massive transfusion protocol initiated." "Oh, negative. Insetur distinti audidens. Bring it now." She shouted already, slicing through the man's tactical pants with trauma shears. Ma'am, you need to lock this hospital down," the lead operator said, leaning against the triage desk, panting heavily. He pulled a laminated DOD identification card from his vest. "Captain Reynolds, JSOC. We are carrying a highly classified intelligence. In Nurkirdadendeed Asafines, and the people chasing us are not going to stop at the front door." Dr. Eris Mitchell, a brilliant but soft-spoken resident, froze, holding an IV bag. Who is chasing you?" As if on cue, the lights in the hospital flickered, buzzed violently, and died. The ER was plunged into pitch darkness for 3 agonizing seconds before the low, throbbing hum of the diesel backup generators kicked in, bathing the corridors in harsh, eerie red emergency lighting. "They cut the main feed," Reynolds muttered, pulling a radio from his chest rig. Static hissed violently from the speaker, jamming localized comms. "Standard military disruption radius. Cell phones will be dead too." "Who are they?" Evelyn demanded, plunging a large bore IV needle into the wounded operator's only good vein. "Ex-contractors, a rogue faction of a private military company, heavily funded, highly trained, and entirely off the books." Reynolds grimaced, peering through the shattered glass of the ER entrance. "And they're here. Two dark armored Bearcat tactical vehicles rolled silently into the ambulance bay, completely blacked out. No headlights, no sirens, just the ominous hum of heavy diesel engines. 8 figures dismounted. They wore panoramic night vision goggles and carried suppressed carbines. They moved with the cold, calculated precision of a professional hit squad. "Everybody down!" Reynolds roared, raising his MK-18. The hospital doors exploded inward. The suppressed weapons didn't sound like the movies. They sounded like a rapid succession of violent mechanical sneezes accompanied by the terrifying supersonic crack of bullets tearing through the air. Glass shattered into a million diamonds. Plaster exploded from the walls. The triage desk, reinforced with a layer of Kevlar after a shooting 3 years prior, absorbed a flurry of rounds shuddering under the impact. Evelyn grabbed Dr. Mitchell by the collar, dragging him hard to the floor behind the desk. "Get the patients out," Evelyn screamed over the deafening noise. "Move them to the interior corridors. Lockdown code black. Insakin Sardin, Pondider. Reynolds and his remaining unwounded teammate, a massive man with the call sign Hayes, returned fire. The thunderous roar of their unsuppressed 5.56mm rifles was deafening in the enclosed space. They managed to drop the first 2 breachers, but the sheer volume of incoming fire forced them back. A flashbang grenade sailed through the broken doors, bouncing twice on the linoleum. "Flash out!" Hayes screamed. Evelyn covered her ears and buried her face in her arms. The explosion was blinding, a concussive shockwave that rattled her teeth and scrambled her inner ear. Smoke filled the corridor. The fire alarms began to shriek. When Evelyn opened her eyes, the situation had deteriorated from a crisis to a massacre in waiting. Hayes was down, a crimson stain spreading across his shoulder armor. Reynolds was out of magazines, his rifle clicking empty. The hit squad was advancing methodically through the smoke, using laser sights to cut through the haze. Nanda nader nenandikins. They had pushed the Black Ops team out of the main lobby and pinned them down in the narrow decontamination corridor that linked the ER to the rest of the hospital. There was no way out. The heavy blast doors at the end of the corridor were locked down due to the power grid failure, requiring a manual override from the security office. They were trapped in a fatal bottleneck. "We hold here," Reynolds choked out, drawing a Glock 19 from his hip holster. He looked at Evelyn, blood pooling around his boots. "Nurse, you need to run. Hide in the vents. When they breach this corridor, they're going to execute everyone to wipe the footprint." Evelyn looked at Reynolds. She looked at the terrified doctors and nurses huddled behind the medical carts. She looked down the hall toward the staff locker rooms located just outside the current kill zone. Her pulse was steady, slower than it should be. The familiar cold hyper-focus that she had spent 12 years trying to bury was clawing its way back to the surface. "Hold them off for 3 minutes, Evelyn said, her voice dropping an octave devoid of any panic. Reynolds blinked, confused by the sudden shift in her demeanor. "What, nurse?" "You can't." 3 minutes, Captain," she interrupted, locking eyes with him. The maternal caring nurse was gone. The stare she gave him was cold, dead, and deeply familiar to men of his profession. It was the thousand-y stare of an apex predator. Before Reynolds could argue, Evelyn slipped away, crawling backward under the heavy smoke cover, vanishing into the maze of the hospital's dark corridors. The staff break room was located 2 corridors over, completely dark, save for the weak beam of the emergency exit signs. Evelyn moved with silent, deliberate steps, her rubber-soled nursing shoes making zero noise against the linoleum. She bypassed the overturned coffee machines and scattered medical files, heading straight for the back wall of the locker room. Locker 42. And Sam Detinen Soam. her heartbeat in a slow rhythmic cadence. For over a decade, she had been Evelyn Carter, the strict but beloved head nurse. She baked cookies for the pediatric ward. She mediated disputes between arrogant surgeons. She went to yoga on Tuesdays. But before Seattle, before the scrubs and the stethoscope, she was known simply as Whisper. She had been a Tier 1 asset attached to the United States Army Intelligence Support Activity Task Force, Orange. She wasn't just a combat medic. She was an infiltration and CQB close quarters battle specialist tasked with keeping deep cover operatives alive in non-permissive environments from the lawless streets of Mogadishu to the black sites of Eastern Europe. She had retired after a mission in Yemen went disastrously wrong, costing her her entire team. She promised herself she would only save lives from then on. No more taking them. But the men tearing apart her air were about to slaughter innocent people. The vow of peace was officially suspended. She reached locker 42. It looked like any standard issue gray metal locker. She opened it, pushing aside a spare set of teal scrubs, a stethoscope, and an oversized cardigan. She pressed her thumb against the seemingly solid metal back panel of the locker. A microscopic biometric scanner read her print. A faint mechanical click echoed and the false back of the locker swung open, revealing a recessed compartment built directly into the drywall. Inside sat a heavy dust-covered Pelican case, padlocked and sealed. She punched a 6-digit code into the lock. It snapped open. Evelyn lifted the lid. The smell of gun oil and specialized polymer filled the small space. Inside lay her past. But more importantly, inside lay a weapon so highly classified and ruthlessly illegal for civilian possession that its mere existence was a closely guarded DARPA secret. She had confiscated it from a rogue defense contractor during her final op in Yemen and kept it as an insurance policy. It was the Archangel prototype. It looked like a heavily modified compact submachine gun, but it was far more insidious. Built on the chassis of a Sig Sauer MCX Rattler chambered in 3000 Blackout, the weapon was fitted with a custom integral suppressor that made its heavy armor-piercing subsonic rounds practically silent. But the real devastating feature was underslung beneath the barrel, a directional miniaturized acoustic disruption emitter developed by a shadowy defense syndicate. The emitter fired a concentrated focused beam of sonic frequency that immediately disrupted the fluid in the inner ear of anyone in its direct path. It bypassed physical armor, causing instantaneous crippling vertigo, violent nausea, and total loss of motor function within a 30-degree cone. It was designed for riot control and hostage extraction, but it was deemed too inhumane and unpredictable for official military use. Evelyn didn't care about humane right now. She quickly stripped off her scrub top, revealing a tight black undershirt. From the bottom of the Pelican case, she pulled out a lightweight, low-profile Kevlar plate carrier and strapped it tight against her ribs. She slapped a loaded 30-round magazine into the Rattler, racked the charging handle, and engaged the safety. The heavy tungsten rounds were designed to shred through level 4 body armor like wet tissue paper. Next, she strapped a customized Heckler & Koch USP Tactical .45 pistol to a dropple holster on her thigh, securing 3 spare magazines to her belt. She primed the acoustic emitter. A faint, almost imperceptible green LED flickered to life on the side of the weapon. She closed the locker. The nurse was gone. The operator was back online. Down the hall, the situation in the decontamination corridor was reaching its bloody climax. Reynolds was out of ammunition, bleeding heavily from a graze wound to his cheek. Hayes was unconscious. The cartel mercenaries were systematically moving down the hallway using the heavy metal medical carts as rolling cover. "They're out of ammo." One of the mercenaries shouted, his voice muffled by a heavy balaclava. "Push up, clear the room, and wipe the civilians. Midar sir di der testat." 4 heavily armed men stacked up outside the double doors of the decontamination room, ready to breach. They raised their rifles, waiting for the signal from their team leader. They never saw her coming. Evelyn didn't attack from the front. She knew the hospital's architecture better than anyone. She had navigated the overhead maintenance crawl space that housed the HVAC units, dropping silently into the supply closet directly behind the mercenary squad's rear guard. She kicked the supply closet door open. It slammed against the wall, drawing the immediate attention of the 2 mercenaries in the rear. They spun around, their night vision goggles glowing an eerie green in the dark hallway. They expected to see a terrified doctor or a panicked security guard. Instead, they saw a woman in tactical gear holding a weapon that looked like something out of a science fiction nightmare. Evelyn didn't pull the trigger on the rifle. Instead, she activated the Archangel's underslung emitter. A barely audible high-frequency thrum vibrated through the air. The effect was instantaneous and horrific. The 2 mercenaries in the rear dropped their weapons instantly. They screamed, clutching their helmets as their equilibrium was violently shattered. The sonic wave turned their inner ears into a chaotic storm of false signals. The man on the left projectile vomited inside his balaclava, collapsing to his knees, utterly incapable of telling up from down. The man on the right violently convulsed his brain, misfiring under the extreme sensory overload and crashed sideways into a crash cart. The remaining 2 mercenaries at the front of the stack spun around in confusion, raising their rifles to fire at the new threat. But Evelyn was already moving. With the first 2 incapacitated, she seamlessly transitioned from the acoustic emitter to the lethal capabilities of the Rattler. She brought the optics to her eye, keeping both eyes open in perfect CQB form. Poofed poof. The suppressed weapon coughed twice. The heavy 3000 blackout rounds punched cleanly through the reinforced visor of the team leader, dropping him instantly. The second man took 2 rounds directly to the center of his chest plate. The armor-piercing tungsten cores shattered the ceramic plates, driving deep into his chest cavity. He slumped against the wall, sliding to the floor, leaving a thick streak of blood on the pristine white paint. Evelyn advanced down the hallway with terrifying predatory grace. She kept her weapon trained on the writhing bodies of the 2 men hit by the acoustic disruptor. She drew her .45 pistol with her left hand, swiftly kicking their rifles down the hallway out of reach before zip-tying their wrists with heavy medical flex cuffs she had grabbed from triage. Inside the decontamination room, Captain Reynolds stared through the reinforced glass window in absolute disbelief. He watched the mild-mannered head nurse systematically dismantle a professional kill squad in less than 10 seconds, moving with the kind of lethal efficiency he had only seen in Delta Force operators. Evelyn stepped over the bodies keying in the security code to unlock the decontamination doors. They slid open with a soft hiss. She stepped inside, her weapon lowered to a low ready position, the barrel smoking slightly in the cool air. She looked at Reynolds, whose jaw was practically on the floor. "Captain," Evelyn said, her voice perfectly calm, devoid of any adrenaline spike. "You're bleeding on my clean floor. We need to move." That was just the breach team. Their reinforcement element will be inside in less than 90 seconds. Napper sender sondaden datin danen durikerd. Reynolds stared at Evelyn, struggling to reconcile the soft-spoken nurse who had just been taking his vitals with the lethal operator, now standing over 4 incapacitated mercenaries. He wiped a mixture of sweat and blood from his brow, his combat-hardened instincts finally rebooting. "Who the hell are you?" Reynolds asked, accepting the suppressed carbine Evelyn kicked over to him. I'm the woman trying to keep blood off my sterile field," Evelyn replied coolly, handing a spare magazine to the JSOC captain. "Dr. Mitchell, drag Hayes into Trauma Bay 4. It is reinforced walls and an independent oxygen supply. Lock the crash doors and do not open them until you hear me say the word Night and Ale. Ninandir som datindam." Understood. Dr. Mitchell, trembling but resolute, nodded. He grabbed the handles of Hayes' striker, gurney, and hauled the massive bleeding operator toward the heavy doors. Good luck, Evelyn. I don't believe in luck, Eris. Just ballistics and anatomy, she said, chambering around in her Archangel prototype. She looked at Reynolds. Their quick reaction force is going to hit the loading docks. It's the only other entry point big enough for a tactical insertion without drawing the attention of every squad car in Seattle. We need to bottleneck them. They'll have thermal optics, Reynolds warned, checking the battery on his newly acquired holographic sight. Indurden das not descent. If they are, who I think they are, a rogue element of Cobalt Security Group, they spare no expense. Nasim dinom tandarobiers. Fleer heavy plates the works. I know Cobalt, Evelyn said, her eyes narrowing. Their CEO, Richard Cross, has been trying to privatize domestic black ops for years. What are you carrying that made him risk hitting a civilian hospital? Reynolds hesitated, then tapped his bloody chest rig. A decrypted ledger. It proves Cross orchestrated the embassy bombing in Bogota last year to secure a $2 billion defense contract. If this drive makes it to Langley Cross, gets a black bag over his head and a one-way trip to a dark site, Enerby de Sansa sin then let's make sure he gets the bag, Evelyn said. Follow me. We're going to radiology. The two moved like ghosts through the flickering red-lit corridors of Mercy General. The storm outside raged on, masking the sound of their footsteps. They bypassed the cafeteria and slipped into the labyrinth and hallways of the imaging wing. Or why radiology?